of this panel is really, where are we seeing the cyber actions that are truly the threat space from China, and also where is the government being the loudest? Part of a lot of the feedback we got to set up this call is that the government's actually being pretty transparent and pretty vocal on a lot of these threats. It's just they're doing them almost everywhere, and so we want to make sure that we kind of put those puzzle pieces in one place so that those that are really looking to have a good idea of that whole of effort is kind of taken on. Let me just kick it over to you, really, Frank. Is there anything that you've seen just immediately? We have the TikTok bill, we have information coming from kind of the appropriations process, even about programs and structure. Is there something you're seeing that just kind of tees this conversation up?
Well, Matt, I think you are seeing a steady drumbeat. It's great to join you as always, and anything Rick says I will agree with, because he is the Jedi on all of these issues. But bottom line is not only is there a steady drumbeat, I think we all recognize what some of the challenges are. I think we're finally getting to the point where we're going beyond admiring problems to figure out what it is we can do from a whole of government, whole of society perspective. From my standpoint, and Rick may disagree with this, but I think you're starting to see indications that we're moving from espionage to potential pre-positioning and planning for attack. That is a big deal. Bottom line is in the cyber domain, if you can exploit, you can attack if the intent is there, depending upon the positioning and obviously some of the specificity around the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures they're using. But I think what you're hearing from all of our government officials, whether it's the director of the National Security Agency, whether it's the combatant commander of Cybercom, whether it's director of the FBI, you're starting to sort of get a sense that this is beyond C&E, and we're starting to get into real concern around potential positioning for attack. Obviously, a lot of this hinges around the broader set of issues in Taiwan and what could trigger the Communist Party of China to transition from espionage, which they've been doing forever. And that's sort of fair game, but I think you're starting to see concern about intentions escalating and what those ramifications are.
So Rick, you just heard from Frank a lot about what we're hearing in like the annual threat brief that comes out for Congress every year. You hear things like being seen as cyber vulnerable is actually a calculation that our adversaries are making against us across critical infrastructure and across government systems. So, I get to turn to my fellow cyber professionals and say, hey, you've never had a magnifying glass like this on you before. Not only are you protecting your systems, but the optics of our systems being secure are actually of national consequence that could have play a card in kinetic warfare down the road in the world of the Taiwanese Straits. So in that kind of a, you don't want to throw hyperbole around, but it is getting that significant. And we're seeing it in DoD reports. We're seeing it everywhere that there's that traditional, here's a little bit more that we've declassified so you can understand the angles on this problem as we see it. It's just getting stronger and stronger. So how do you see that from your perspective? Are we getting the message out? And two, where do you see it going next?
Yeah, I think first off, thanks for having me, Matt, and good seeing you, Frank. I think that this is something China's been working on for a number of years, at least 15 years that I know of, where the things that were in different, more classified settings are now becoming more publicly known. And some of that's the decisions by the U.S. government, and some of that's decisions by China and actions that they're taking. I've said it before that I think China is like global warming. It's insidious, it's there, and it's getting worse over time. And so as the Chinese continue to do the things that they do, and you're absolutely right, they are going after critical infrastructure, and they are doing it for the express purpose of interfering with the ability of the U.S. to move supplies to Taiwan in the event of a cross-straits conflict. They're doing it to affect the morale of the U.S. population. It's hard to generate enthusiasm for war when your telephones don't work or your power doesn't work or you can't get groceries, that sort of thing. This is all part of the Chinese plan. And that's just one of the 5 poisons. The other ones were Falun Gong, pro-democracy, Tibet, and the Uyghurs. And they're actively engaged in cyber across all those venues. They don't all make the press in the U.S. If the Uyghurs get attacked in cyber or Tibet or pro-democracy movements or Falun Gong, that doesn't really make the news very much, but it's there. And so this is all part and parcel of China's plans, and it's separate and apart from, are they going to invade next year or not? That's a different decision than doing the preparatory work, the cyber work that you need to be, or that they need to be ready in case they do decide to invade. So they're giving Xi Jinping the flexibility that will let him make that call.
Matt, a couple of points that I think are worth foot stomping here. Are they intentionally signaling? Are we getting better at on the blue side of highlighting some of this activity? I think that's a ripe discussion that I'm not sure there's a right or wrong answer to. But the other reality here is they are integrating cyber into their broader warfighting strategy and doctrine, and also their geopolitical goals and objectives. So I think that we have historically looked at cyber as a tactical set of issues, a way to enhance our capabilities to do X, Y, or Z. I think what we're seeing coming out of Beijing right now is pretty strategic in the machinations. And the question I have is, what's our signaling other than they're in our backyard? I mean, at the end of the day, I think there's a whole lot that U.S. government ought to be thinking to hopefully de-escalate the situation. But in the reality is the initiative remains with the attacker in this space. And I'm a little curious, and maybe Rick, I'd be curious what your thoughts are, and you too, Matt. Is the signaling blatant? Or is it that we're getting better at picking some of this up and rightfully providing some early warning to our owners and operators? Because the reality is this battlefield's all a society, and they're hitting critical infrastructure.
And I think you saw some of that with the Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, they were very transparent. They were very vocal, very loud. I think there was a lot of folks that just wanted to know if this was bluster or true executable operational strategy. And we're seeing that play out. And so I think there is a playbook for this. And those in the market now know how to be very confident when they hear directly from the leadership of that country that they're going to execute in a certain direction, that it better take it seriously. This isn't like we hear from other nation state adversaries that they just bluster on and you don't see those after effects. So it is something that's being, at least from the other side, being listened to more intently for this particular China adversary. I think that when we refer to them in the economic sense as a competitor, I think it waters down some of the things they're saying actively in their militarization and their outlook of the world. And so I think that's kind of where things get blurry. It's hard to kind of meld those two. So I think that we have good signal reception when we're talking about national security, but when it blends into economic security, there almost seems to be this fading effect to where they're like, well, they're being good partners here, so we'll just box that up and treat that as a trusted pillar for the moment. And it's not the perception of our adversaries that that's a trusted pillar. That's just another tool in the toolbox. And when cyber comes and overlays there, we're just introducing additional risk to those economic and candidly supply chain trails all throughout. And so I think it's a challenge where they've strategically played their hand to be in a lot of our pocketbooks and our supply chains at a point where it makes it a difficult, or at least a more challenging, national security conversation. I'll turn that over to Rick for his thoughts as well.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that the U.S. is focused on quarterly returns, quarterly results. driven by the profits and makes decisions in that vein. The Chinese make decisions looking 20 years down the road. Where do we want to be? What do we want the world to look like? And that makes it a hard fight. Couple that with the what I'll call the fragmentation in the marketplace, where you've got this gigantic Chinese domestic market, and companies really want to get access to that. And the Chinese, over the last several years, have executed a series of laws that make it near impossible for companies to get in and use their advantage in technology or innovation or that sort of thing for anything other than a few quarters, maybe a year. Because when you get into the Chinese market, you're required to give them access to what you're providing them. That then gives them the chance to take it, copy it, and offer it back themselves. And we've seen that time and again over the last decade where it's happened. And so that positions China to take advantage in a way that the US just doesn't have.
And they've actually ratcheted up their State Secrets Act recently. So as if it wasn't already at a 10, it's now at the 10 plus. So, yeah.
So Frank, just jumping back to you about, we had the cyber solarium, and Mark Montgomery's operating kind of that solarium 2.0. But are we looking at, when we talk to students nowadays, the learning techniques and modalities have changed and shifted a good bit. You almost have to introduce all kinds of innovative ways to get through to those students. And one of the ways I've used is kind of like, look at this very popular meme. And so you have like an internet meme, which has like this utopia on the right and a problem on the left. And if not for this problem, we would be here right now. And so talking to the students, like, where do you see this utopia? And just so you know, the Chinese government, their picture of utopia is America at number 2. And so how do we look 5 and 10 years in the structure for what is our happy place? Where is our utopia GIF? And how does that strategically backfall for the next 10 years? Because right now we see, if you're asking someone that's in the soon to be graduated college or secondary school market, what is your faith in Congress? It's through the floor. They don't think there's anything that's going to come out of Washington, D.C. that's going to shape towards this success. So they're hoping that there are folks across these partnerships and the like to take on these kinds of threats. And they're looking for, what does good look like? So 10 years from now, we have that, magic 8-ball moment of what technology is going to be. But in this relationship with China, do we see what a positive may be? Is it the equivalent of their Great Firewall, where they're on one side and we're on the other? Is it a world where we've actually decoupled? Is it, just as you mentioned, Frank, where we've lowered the temperature on this and found a way where there doesn't have to be a 1 versus 2 kind of competition like we see right now from the Chinese perspective? I don't think that's possible, but that's the kind of conversation that we should be having. Like, what does our future hold? And right now we're really looking backwards and saying, okay, how do we keep what just happened from happening again? And we kind of repeat that cycle.
A lot of deep philosophical questions there, Matt. I'll try to unpack a few because I think you raised some really key points here. And I don't mean to be brash, but at the end of the day, I still come back to most people, I don't think, wish they were born in Beijing. So I think the American dream, innovation, the concept behind it that goes far beyond our government is our secret sauce. And that's something we cannot afford to lose. And the reality is, and this is not meant to say something brash, but we can't make the cure is worse than the disease. That's the bottom line here, because we're protecting something not only from an adversary, but something that makes our innovation unique. I do think in the government environment, we still have not clearly articulated a deterrent strategy. And all things said and done, there is a China strategy, there's a cyber strategy. The two can't be in isolation. They have to be married up. And I think there's a whole lot more that we can do there to make very clear and aggressively what is at risk and what is unacceptable and what certain behaviors could lead to. Tough set of questions, because like you said, it gets you've got the military environment, you got the economic, and the two have have to come together. But I do think when you really get down to it, what they impose on their own citizens versus what they are conveying to others are very different. So I think we've taken for granted that democratic principles, norms, and the like will continue to be the beacon, as we all hope they will be. But we can't take that for granted. That's the reality here. Autocratic regimes and others can utilize technology in ways that can be very powerful, and we need to make sure that those principles are part of whatever our response in fact is. Does that mean we're going to have a have and have not autocratic? Is it going to be split? I wish I had an answer for you on that, but I do think we do need to double down on articulating a concrete deterrent strategy that imposes cost and consequence on bad behavior, makes clear what some of those rules of the road are, and then we have to have the political will to back that up once we put those statements in hopefully not the sand, in concrete. So I don't know if I touched all of your points there, but those are weighty topics, and I still tend to think we have the best brains, the best people, the best principles that hopefully can drive us forward on this.
I agree, Frank, with what you say there. I would also argue, Matt, that in regards to your question about the optimum state that we're working towards, it's important to know that the decreasing confidence in Congress, which was already in the teens, I think is probably maybe single digits now, is really a twofold problem. One is it's self-inflicted. One is it's us bickering internally and starting off in the center and working our way to the corners and then throwing bombs at each other verbally and online, especially online. The other aspect of that is it's things that are being done to us. Russia has an active campaign directed against the U.S., has had for several years, going back to 2014, that is designed to shred apart the comedy, the ability to get along in the U.S. They will find an issue and they don't care what the issue is, and they don't care which side they'll take. They'll pour gasoline on both sides in order to cause people to not be able to get along. And the Chinese started doing the same thing. And so they have an active disinformation, misinformation campaign where they're doing that sort of thing. And so, again, it's insidious, it's slow, and it's hard to nail down, but it's a sort of thing that in 5 or 10 years, we may be saying, gosh, remember back in 2024 when a whole 10% of the population thought Congress was doing a good job? Wow, those were the good old days. That would be a very bad place for the nation to be in.
Well, and the things you touched on, especially when we start talking about adversarial play in our social media and our general discourse around our culture issues, there's a concept around China's collection of bulk data on us. I mean, when you start talking about all the way back to OPM, looking forward to the TikTok conversation, we don't treat our personal data as a national resource. It truly is. It's going to be one that leads us down a road to further developing the tools and processes, and that utopia meme as we go towards it is all going to be based on having these larger data sets that we can actually do true science around, and when those are being extracted, hacked, taken, bought, and not leveraged domestically, but leveraged by our adversaries for either targeting or just advancement with our own IP past us. That's the challenge that China's seeing as well. Frank, just talking to you about just pure bulk data concerns. I mean, are you seeing where we're starting to get a better grip on that, or are we still in the recognize the problem phase?
You know, Matt, that is a great point, and it bleeds right into the artificial intelligence set of discussions because it is about the data. It's about refining the models, ingesting enough data to be able to induce changes in someone's behavior or mimic it so closely that you wouldn't even be able to delineate or differentiate from that behavior. I mean, that can't get lost in all these big data exfil situations. It's not always about the particular target. Can it be refined for that? Absolutely. Has it been? Yes. But I think you've got a bigger set of questions that is actually trying to titrate and get the AI model smarter, better, and more refined. We are nowhere near recognizing that. We look at what sorts of data was compromised. We've got a whole lot of legislative language around PII information and the like, but looking at data in its totality, I think we're nowhere near recognizing that as the potential concern it is. And from my standpoint, it really is about refining AI models. Rick, would you agree with that, or you think I'm off the mountain on that one?
No, I think you're right. I think that's a big part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that the entities that sustain the US economy, Microsoft, Google, Apple, Meta, you pick the large company that comprises most of the percentage-wise of the economic growth of the US over the last, pick your number of years, their business model is challenged by our attempt to make data a national security issue, because they have a different business model, which is your data is my data and I'm going to use it for advertising and things like that. And so there's a real danger there of us over legislating early on to clamp controls on it and then poisoning our own economy. And so we need to make data recognized as national security, and we need to do it in a way that lets those businesses operate the way that they have been, or steer them towards something that's closer to what we want without cutting them off entirely. That's really going to be the artful part of this, I think.
And Matt, just one other issue, because I think you do raise a key topic there that I think is ripe for both policy making and research and just awareness and understanding. The other big event that sort of you're seeing a confluence is obviously around supply chain issues, which became very apparent and imminent during COVID and obviously with respect to PPE and therapeutics and the like. And just looking at every port that had backups galore, even when we could gain access to what we were hoping to. That too is a big set of issues, and I think we're starting to see, obviously, recognition. We're starting to onshore some skills and the like. But I think that is something that, quite honestly, we were part of the problem. We were selling everything blindly, and I do think we need to be able to bring some of that back home.
Yeah, and you're going to see, anytime we talk about, my favorite subject, which is emerging threats, that's usually from where we've been successful innovators, but didn't batten down all the hatches as we proceeded down that hallway. And so when we look at things that we saw from just the lessons learned from UAS or UAV or whichever acronym we're using now, the small drone ability really took off. It was something that we basically outlined to our Chinese and other vendors and said, have at it. These are great toys. These are great uses. They're not something we're really interested in right now. And then fast forward, we're like, oh, we now have supply chain concerns. We now have command and control concerns. We now have a lot of different perspectives of how that emerging technology could be leveraged with a cyber overlay of how you could get into these types of things. Now we start looking to the future and we start talking about things. All right, well, if in 5 years, if everyone in America is able to get their DNA taken care of, and it's a part of our medical practitioner world, 5, 10 years, what have you. That's going to be a new set of data. You think protecting PII is bad, wait till it costs $5 to get your human genome. That's where I feel our adversaries are looking for us to start to blueprint and telegraph. This is where we're headed with new valuable data, new valuable operations, new valuable systems and services. And they're looking to see, are they going to lock that down? Are they going to share it with us in academia and then kind of wink into the camera? I mean, there's a challenge that we have as we innovate down the road that I'm not really sure we learned a lot of great lessons moving forward. I think that when we look at the way we sped up and what everyone refers to as Web 2.0, that was a race to the dollar as opposed to a race to security. And we understand those motivations, but the lessons learned of how to secure those and the notions of zero trust and identity being the new security model really don't translate well when we start talking about some of these future technologies because we haven't figured it out yet. And so I'm hopeful that at least we can get that conversation pivoted as we get the startups and the good government wheel running once they get 2 or 3 years behind on something and want to act really quickly, that we can kind of spin that up. But let me turn to you, Rick. Is there an emerging technology that really has your attention that we might not be focused on well enough that our adversaries in China may be looking at, be it a cyber threat or sort of that overlaid digital infrastructure kind of conversation?
Yeah, I think that Volt Typhoon going after the critical infrastructure has been a wake up call. Or at least I hope it's a wake up call for the nation. And what you see, if you look at the 16 critical infrastructures, the National Infrastructure Advisory Council did a study a few years back where they looked at the 16 of them and they said there's 3 that matter the most: telecommunications, finance, and electrical power. And if any one of those goes down, the other 2 quickly follow. And then over time, there's a slow degradation of the other ones. And so it's kind of a thing that goes like that. That's true, but what you're seeing is an increase over the last 6 months to a year of attacks on water supply. You think about water supply. That's not something anybody thinks about much, maybe when you pay your water bill, but it's critical to us, living the life that we want to and doing the things that we need to. And it's also complicated, like electrical power and some other critical utilities, by being managed at the local level, where you've got public utilities commissions and entities like that regulate costs. They can't double your water bill to pay for cybersecurity because that would hurt people. But we have to do something to fix that. I think that water and distribution networks, things like the people that deliver gasoline to the gas stations, those sorts of things are, I think that's where China is going to go next.
Matt, can I just pick up on that? Because I
Absolutely.
think Rick raised a lot of good points. Third-party risk is still a big one. If you look in the healthcare sector right now, it's entities I'd never heard of that are holding a lot of data and very valuable information and aggregating. Back to your data question, you've got data that's aggregated there that is clearly at risk and being exploited, largely by ransomware owner-operators, but I'm sure by nation states as well. When I look at water, I mean, if you're in the Middle East, water really matters when you're in a desert, and Israel has been targeted extensively by the government of Iran and its proxies and others. Same with UAE and KSA, Saudi Arabia, and others that I think we have some lessons we can learn there that we have seen play out, not at the scale they've seen, but everything that happens somewhere has the potential to be a preview of a movie coming to a theater near you. So I think we do need to be paying close attention to that. A couple of big emerging technologies that I am concerned about. I am concerned about quantum. We can't afford to lose that race. I'm not sure how close we are, but at the end of the day, if you can keep all your secrets and exploit others, that's a position we will never want to be on the other side of. We just can't be playing catch up there. And then it's really convergence of technologies. You brought up sort of biotech and IT. To me, space is, as Matt knows, and I think Rick knows, that's a very passionate area for me, because it is a lot like cyber. It's its own domain, but it transcends all existing domains as well. So those are three areas that, surprise, surprise, the Communist Party of China has not only identified very blatantly in its Belt Road Initiative and its prioritization, but I think those are three that come top of mind to me, in addition to obviously all our critical infrastructure sectors. Because yes, the tri-sector is at the top. I agree with that, Rick. But like you said, you've got other sectors that society is really dependent upon for its health and welfare that are not nearly as robust from a security standpoint.
Well, and then that kind of brings us to the, how do we make sure that we're running it at pace with some of these challenges? So we have a lot of strong partnerships between academia and government and industry. There's been a lot more conversation. We've gone from no such agency to the National Security Agency, and it feels like days, but it's been years, and it's great. There's a lot more transparency into where we see threats and where they lie. But at the same time, we're kind of in this teetering balance that almost seems to be the similar problem. Okay, is it on me, the critical infrastructure operator, to protect myself from nation state? What is the government doing to help me here? At the same time, what is the, we talked about at the very beginning, what is the retribution that happens? And a lot of the time, there's this behind the scenes work. There's diplomatic efforts. There's levers all over the place. You hit us with cyber, we may hit you with a different lever from the government powers playbook. So it's kind of difficult for the industry partners to really see that all of this is going on, because some of it is for sources and methods and a lot of other reasons not out in the open. So Rick, let me turn to you and just say, is there something that, one, industry should know that we are active in this domain, even if it's not as apparent as it might seem, even though we made these great enhancements? And two, is there a place that industry should really be plugging in if they aren't already?
Yeah, so I think for industry to plug in, let me take that question first. I think the right place is CISA, your old organization. I think that they are the part of the U.S. government that's responsible for doing that, and the more help that they get from industry, the better off everyone is going to be in that sense. And Jen Easterly didn't tell me to say that. It's a pre. On the things that are going on behind the scenes, back when a few years ago we still had track 1.5 and track 2 discussions going on with China, and I believe those have stopped now. And along the lines of the just recently restarted military hotline that we've got with China. So those need to come back, because there is value in there. There is value in having those conversations and getting to know people. And then there's classified stuff that goes on that I'm not going to talk about, and you're not going to talk about, and Frank's not going to talk about, but it's there. I would argue though that critical infrastructure, they have a concern, needs to raise it, and they need to raise it with a little bit of feeling behind it, because there is more that could be done and that should be done. So encouraging the U.S. government to do that is, I think, a good thing for infrastructure providers to do.
And so, Frank, we've seen JCDC under Jen Easterly, and I'm sure Rick's going to get an extra Rubik's Cube in the mail. And but with JCDC and that kind of operations mindset, do they have the authorities and efforts to really spread the good know-how to everyone across critical infrastructure? Like, how do you see that playing out a couple of years from now? Is this a great building block, or is this actually something that we just need to expand upon?
That's a great question, and I'm biased because JCDC came out of JICPO, very bad acronym, Joint Cyber Planning Office, out of Solarium Commission, which recognized information sharing ain't information sharing unless it could be implemented and operationalized. So I think that is still the right direction to take. Here's my, and I think Jen's done yeoman's work and Sis is doing great work across the board, but the underbelly are small and medium-sized businesses. That's still where most innovation in our great country comes from. It's not only going to be in the big 10 companies that are driving, they may drive a big portion of the economy and the markets and everything else, but it really is small and medium-sized businesses. And how do we get to them? How do we provide resources for organizations that may not even be able to absorb the simplest of resources? How do we get them to build some trust? There's a huge trust deficit here, and it's not just the JCDC type companies. They recognize because they got a big old target on their back, so they don't have a choice but to recognize all of this. But I do worry about state, local, tribal, territorial, SLTT entities, and I do worry about small and medium-sized businesses. And I think that's where the JCDC mindset needs to go. I'm just not sure structured as it is the ideal way forward. I'm not smart enough and close enough to know that, but the reality is that's where we need help.
Well, and so you touched on, go ahead, Rick.
I was just going to say, if we're in problem solving mode now, I think one thing that we could do with the 10 companies that I mentioned that Frank alluded to is give them some responsibility. Say, your job, Microsoft, Google, whomever, is to help protect these small and medium businesses. And you do that, it's going to cost you some money, but you're making a lot of money, so it's okay. And encourage that sort of a thing, or legislate that sort of a thing. I would start with encouraging, though, and if we indicated that we were serious enough about it, that would make some of that happen. The other thing is, Mark Montgomery would likely say that this is really about the money. And if you want critical infrastructure to be fixed, you're going to have to provide that money. Some of it could come from the companies that I described. Some of that's going to have to come from rates. There's going to need to be rate increases to really make the change that you need to make. And that is a touchy subject because it goes directly to voters who don't want that sort of thing. But at some point, it's either that or learn to speak Chinese.
And I think everybody would pay just a little bit on their wire bill, or at least hopefully, if it got that drastic. So when we start talking about SLTT and some of the challenges with getting, that expanded reach, part of this, especially even with Volt Typhoon, was on the John Q. public. I mean, we have people's home routers getting leveraged against critical infrastructure. And when I was at CISA and within DHS, there was always this conversation, like, who is that public affairs unit that is kind of marketing cyber there? And CISA's taken this on, and they've done a couple kind of PR type moves with updating and patching systems. They recently were at the Super Bowl and did a great job there. The challenge is how do you get something like that to scale, where you have someone actually concerned that their home router could be used against their employer, or their home router could be used against their government if they don't keep it up to date like that. I mean, there's a hard enough conversation about updating your iPhone, and when it gets more complicated than just saying yes, how do we get the general public involved in this? And I struggle with this. We all have family members that look at you and they're like, ugh, again with the patching, but yes, I mean, it has to be done. So I'm curious to hear if you guys have a winning campaign slogan that we can make sure gets in everybody's heads. But the public awareness aspect of it is a big deal.
Matt, I certainly, my campaign would probably not get off the starting blocks, but I genuinely believe we need a no broken windows theory, which did have impact and effect for NYPD and policing in New York, and in a very community policing sense, not just in a pointy end law enforcement perspective, which is part of the solution. But I kind of feel like there is some there from a sociological perspective, but like I said, if I'm pushing it, it's not going far. We need to make it cool, and the reality is that is where we need to spend some time. I still speak to people every day. Who do I call when an incident occurs, and what is that 911 equivalent for cyber incidents? And the reality is we don't have one right now. I know we're doing what we can. And again, I'm going to foot stomp state, local, tribal, territorial here. Let's make them part of the solution, not necessarily just a target, and further bring along our state and local law enforcement, firefighters, EMS, and the like to be part of this solution set.
Hey, Matt, I think that part of the answer is the national cyber strategy that Chris Inglis and the NCD put out last year. I think talks about giving responsibility to providers, and I think that's the kind of case where I would do that. I would say, Comcast or Verizon or whomever provides your home internet, you are now responsible for keeping my home router up to date, and you can do that remotely. And I'll agree to that. I'll sign over and let you do that. And there will be some subset of the population that worries about the government's going to put their mind control software in my home router. And so you need a way to address that. But at the end of the day, I think is really the only solution that is at all economical is to do something like that. Australia tried that a few years ago, and they ran into some legal issues, and they had to stop. But I still think it's the right way.
I think we have, go ahead, Frank.
No, I was just going to say, but you could have an opt-in function as well, where vast majority would opt in, and then you own some of the consequences if you don't. So I don't think they're necessarily completely at odds. I don't disagree with that at all.
And we had a question come through the chat over here from Joyce Hunter, who said 95% of all businesses are small or medium. How are you going to kind of get the large businesses to cover those basic expenses and costs? And one of the challenges you're seeing out of the cybersecurity strategy on that harmonizing of regulatory cyber controls that already are on the books is not the easiest rock to flip over. And so I think regulatory is going to be tough. You're seeing a little bit of that out of the DoD with CMMC, where they kind of say, okay, if you are a prime vendor to the government, your subcontractors and all the partners that come under your big tent are going to be a part of your reputational value with us with this contract. And so there you have to kind of mandate compliance all the way down, however it's a supported package or not. And so there's that kind of approach to where the government says, hey, if we're using our money, you have to facilitate our guidelines. But the broader regulatory conversation is a bit of a tough one. And so I don't think there's a forcing function as much as a good governance, good citizen, good company compelling function. And we do see a lot of that when we start to talk about some of the broader cultural causes across technology companies, like women in technology, like making sure we share the mic. There are initiatives that through no impetus of the government that are shared and invested in. So it's kind of trying to hitch on to that. But let me pass that to you, Rick, and see if you had anything else to add on that question.
Yeah, I think those are good points. I think also you can have companies contribute to a fund and set up a business that provides services to small and medium companies. And it wouldn't cover every company in the universe, but it would address some of them. And so that sort of approach is what I would look at. I would not look at it as the government mandating that you must do X, Y, and Z. I think that's the short route to insanity. But you can put in place broad regulation, broad rules that encourage people to do the right thing and give them the space within which to do that.
A shared fate co-op. I like it. All right, Frank?
Yeah, no. You raise a number of really good points there, and I agree with what both of you said. The one thing I would add is, I mean, historically, I was always mitigate before litigate or regulate. That was just my mindset writ large, because I think if you're really trying to induce changes in behavior, you want to build the business case and the incentives to do so. That said, I actually am all in on some of the current regulatory mechanisms because it wasn't working. And here, whether it's data breach notification, I still think we need a national law so we don't have 50 different states and the company has to fill out 50 different forms for every time they've been breached. But I do think we're at the point where we can get a little smarter around that. But again, it's going to be the small and medium-sized businesses. The SEC reporting requirements, I think, are pretty much they're pretty green light in my eyes in terms of what we ought to do. But again, I still think there is the need to help small and medium-sized businesses, as the questioner Joyce, I think, asked. That is the belly button, and that's our in my eyes, biggest concern from a security standpoint.
All right, well, we've got a few seconds to wrap up here. We'll give each of you like a couple minutes to give your final thoughts, but just to kind of discuss what we've hit on is China's switching posture in the cyber domain. They've gone from intelligence and information gathering to posturing for disruption. We see an escalation in their adversarial techniques and where they are looking to be interested to go to find any inroad into something they want to get their hands on. We're seeing big data grabs for the purpose of AI, and we're seeing big data grabs for the purpose of, what their future may hold. We see a very transparent adversary, and we see a very strategic adversary. At that point, we're working with our whole of government to get our systems of systems aligned. But now I just want to give you guys a closing thought before we move on to hearing from the White House. Rick, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Matt, for having me and for pairing me with Frank, who's awesome. I just think that China is the pacing threat facing the U.S. for the next 50 years. And we need to think about it that way. It needs to underpin all of our thoughts as we work through the cyber and the national security and the economic security strategies. And we need to keep it front of mind and keep it on the front burner, and any other cliches you can think of that would mean the same thing. I would just, I'll end with that.
All right, Frank.
Hey, Matt, it's always a privilege to be on with you. And of course, Rick, always learn a lot. And rarely do we have big points of disagreement, even when I look for them. So bottom line in all of this is I think we need to, I very much agree. I would go beyond pacing. I would say they are the existential threat we face in terms of being able to marshal and mobilize an economy and an economy of force that can also be brought into military capabilities. They're top of the list. That's not to suggest that Russia, North Korea, Iran, you name it, what they lack in capability, they can make up for it with intent, and anyone can have the bar is pretty low to have a significant cyber capability. But when we look at existential, China's at the very top of the list, the Communist Party. I also think we need to recognize, and this, there may be some disagreement, but they're not just imitators anymore. They're innovators. And they followed that up with the money. Back to the Montgomery point, policy without resources is rhetoric. They're spending money. The difference is they're stealing it. Why spend money in the R&D if you can steal it and then put all that money toward bells and whistles and making something faster, better, smarter, rather than having to invest in the early stage economic sets of questions. So bottom line is we've got to recognize that. We've got to go beyond just saying the scary stuff and actually put in place manageable programs that can be acted upon. We need a roadmap, and I'm going to come back to this point. We need to articulate a cyber deterrence strategy and a deterrence strategy that has playbooks for specific actors and also more strategically in the cyber domain itself. So lots to do. We'll be we'll have this conversation in 15 years, I think. So let's just hope we're the not just pacing, but we're out in front.
And then we're having it in English, not Chinese.
I'm too old for anything else, so I can barely speak English, Rick, as you know. So all good.